Media and influencers on all sides of the political spectrum are screaming that Donald Trump sold out in his meetings with Zelensky and Netanyahu. The real enemy just admitted that Donald Trump has them on the ropes. Just days after Donald Trump released his national security strategy in early December, the British House of Lords convened a session in London to discuss how to stop Trump and his new strategy. And one of them was caught on record telling his peers to ignore the president because, as he said,
I was in Washington, D.C. last week with other members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and when the national security strategy was discussed with our fellow elected members in the US, their message was clear that NSSs come and go, sometimes they're implemented and sometimes they don't, but we should judge by what Congress passes, and the National Defence Appropriation Act last week delivered an extra £8 billion to European defence and put a floor of some 76,000 troops, US troops in Europe.
The translation of that? The national security strategy is a mortal threat to the British Empire, and we're going to activate all of our networks in the United States to try and stop it. They're saying this because they're terrified. But if you listen to the noise in Washington and in social media, you'd think Trump was the one losing control. Because in the last few days after the president met with Zelensky and Netanyahu, the political world has exploded. Now, if you listen to Mike Pompeo and the neocons, Trump sold out to Putin. If you listen to the anti-war crowd, he sold out to Zelensky. If you follow the MAGA wars or Marjorie Taylor Greene, you're being told he surrendered to Israel, or can we just do America? They're all wrong. What you just witnessed wasn't a sellout, it was a takeover. It was the first live-fire test of the very strategy the British are trying to kill. Trump hasn't surrendered. He signed the Do Not Resuscitate order for the British post-war world. And that's why they're not celebrating in London or Brussels tonight. They realize the special relationship, their ability to manipulate American power for their wars, is over, as long as Donald Trump is calling the shots. I'm Susan Kokinda. I became politically active way back in 1968, campaigning for Robert F. Kennedy Sr. in California when he was assassinated. For decades, my colleagues at Promethean Action and I have been in the real fight. So take it from a political veteran. If enough of you understand what Trump is doing, we're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our independence in 2026 by finishing the job. So if that sounds like your kind of fight, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons so we can expand our reach. Today I'm going to look at how the new national security strategy is in action with Trump's meetings with Zelensky and Netanyahu, how the British are directly deployed to stop the national security strategy, and how Trump's economic revolution led by tariffs is the final blow to the British system. Now, if you're living in the world of binary choices, pro-Israel versus pro-Palestinian, free world versus Putin and the other autocrats, you're missing the tectonic shifts taking place. So you have Mike Pompeo screaming that Trump sold out to Putin. You have a part of the MAGA movement declaring that Trump sold out to Netanyahu, and another part applauding it. And they're all wrong. The truth is in this document, the 2025 National Security Strategy. And this week, Trump used it to clear the board. So let's start with Russia and Ukraine. The British and the EU sent Zelensky to Mar-a-Lago with a mission: demand open-ended security guarantees, NATO membership, and keep the war machine running. They're operating off of Winston Churchill's post-war playbook that says Russia is our permanent enemy. But Trump is operating off his new national security strategy. And here's what it says. It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, to prevent unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and reestablish strategic stability with Russia. And then a little later, and to end the perception and prevent the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. That is what is driving Trump's negotiating position with Zelensky. So how did the empire respond to Trump's refusal to bend? Immediately after the meeting, drones attacked President Putin's residence in Valdai. The Russians were furious, but they called it a slap in the face to Trump. Now, ask yourself, was this really just Zelensky going rogue? Or was the British hand at work? We're not alone in pointing out that British intelligence plays a bigger role in guiding these drone systems than the Ukrainians do. As the conservative Treehouse blog put it in their coverage of the attack, I suspect the British did it. So this wasn't a military strike. It was a sabotage operation designed to blow up the Trump-Putin peace channel. But Trump and Putin refused to take the bait. They aren't pawns anymore. Here's Trump's response.
President Putin told me about it. Early in the morning, he said he was attacked. That's no good. It's no good. Don't forget, the Tomahawks. I stopped the Tomahawks. I didn't want that. Because we're talking about, it's a delicate period of time. This is not the right time. It's one thing to be offensive, because they're offensive. It's another thing to attack his house. It's not the right time to do any of that, and can't do it. And I learned about it from President Putin today. I was very angry about it.
And Putin's spokesman Ushakov reported that in that conversation with Trump, Vladimir Putin emphasized that the Russian side intends to continue close and productive work with its U.S. partners in searching for ways to achieve peace. Now watch how this same grand strategy explains the panic over the Netanyahu meeting. For decades, the British have used the Mideast as the cockpit of war. They've created Zionism and Islamic fundamentalism to play the superpowers and victim nations against each other. The new national security strategy flips the board over. It accurately states that for a half-century, American foreign policy prioritized the Mideast above all other regions because it was a major energy supplier, and it described it as a prime theater of superpower competition. But the NSS goes on to say those dynamics no longer hold because superpower competition has given way to great power jockeying, in which the United States retains the most enviable position, reinforced by President Trump's successful revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf, with other Arab partners, and with Israel. Catch that? Revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf with other Arab partners and with Israel. Not Israel first, despite what Tucker Carlson thinks. Trump is saying, we're not playing your games any longer. And he is deliberately and quietly removing countries from the grip of the geopoliticians and treating them as independent nations with common interests with the United States, not as pawns or gas stations or triggers for religious prophecy. So in that content, here's what Trump actually told Bibi Netanyahu. You aren't the sheriff anymore. We'll take care of Iran if needed, and a coalition of outside forces will take care of Hamas if needed. Number 2, we don't agree on the West Bank, and you're going to have to deal with that. And number 3, the United States is working with Syria and with Turkey's Erdogan, whether you like it or not. Trump is taking countries who are run by not-so-nice people, like Syria, like Turkey, and for that matter, Israel, and moving them off Britain's geopolitical chessboard and into the world dominated by Trump's America First policies of sovereignty. This is grand strategy. For the first time since 1945, the United States is acting as a sovereign nation, not as the queen protecting the empire's chessboard. And Trump is knocking the chess pieces off their board one by one. He's replacing permanent war with bilateral business. This is really big. But if you're stuck in the binary trap, arguing about which side is the good guys, you're not going to understand this. So if you're tired of being forced to pick a side in someone else's war, you're ready for the American side. Subscribe to Promethean Action right now. We don't feed you binary choices. We show you the history behind the conflicts and the sovereign solutions that are actually changing the world. So head on over to our website and subscribe to our free newsletter. But I'll tell you who does get it. The elites in London. They know the jig is up and they're desperate to stop it. So the British Empire isn't going to go down without a fight. On December 11th, not too long after Trump released his national security strategy, the British House of Lords was all ready. They held a pearl-clutching session about the NSS and what they had to do about it. First, Lord Beamish happily reported that the U.S. Congress doesn't agree with Trump and his national security strategy.
Last week, the US Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed the National Defence Authorization Act, which was signed by the President on Thursday night. That act gives a commitment to US troops in Europe, also highlights that it sees Russia as a threat not just to Europe but to the United States, and also gives a commitment to future US commitment to providing the senior military figure for Secure, the leader of the commander of NATO. Does my noble friend agree that we should be looking at actions rather than some of the wild statements coming from the White House?
Yeah.
Then Lord Lancaster reported that he had just been in the U.S., where he discussed the problem of the national security strategy with members of the U.S. Congress.
I was in Washington, D.C. last week with other members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and when the national security strategy was discussed with our fellow elected members in the US, their message was clear that NSSs come and go, sometimes they're implemented and sometimes they don't, but we should judge by what Congress passes, and the National Defence Appropriation Act last week delivered an extra £8 billion to European defence and put a floor of some 76,000 troops, US troops in Europe.
Did you hear that? National security strategies come and go. Does that remind you of what we reported last week? How outlets of empire like Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations want to outlast the president by bringing his economic and strategic revolution to an end in 2026 or 2028? How they're maintaining their Trojan horses in the Congress and the rest of the political landscape, the rhinos, the never-Trumpers like Mike Pence and the Koch interests? So while too many in the MAGA base are caught up in the fabricated faction fights and secondary issues, or frankly are acting like 5-year-olds demanding headline-grabbing indictments right now, Donald Trump is dismantling a strategic architecture that has been in place since 1945, an architecture that's used the United States as the dumb giant in the British Empire's globalist schemes, and the British know it. But even bigger than Trump's strategic revolution is the economic revolution, because that's what this is really all about. Go back to the end of World War II and the summit in Casablanca, where Franklin Roosevelt said to Winston Churchill, "Winston, we didn't fight that war to reestablish British 18th century methods." And Churchill countered and said, "What do you mean by that?" And FDR said, "A system that takes more out of a country than it puts back in." Well, Roosevelt died before the war ended, and the result was the ultimate triumph of British 18th century methods, or a system which takes more out than it puts in. Look at what has happened to the United States. We used to have a middle and working class based on a robust manufacturing sector and a tradition of family farms. And here's what's happened since the end of World War II. In 1950, 31% of the U.S. population was engaged in manufacturing. Today, it's only 8%. And if you add other goods-producing sectors like agriculture and mining and transportation, we used to have 55% engaged in productive activity. Today, it is less than 20. Our good-paying jobs, our industry, our infrastructure, our family farms, they disappeared along with the middle class. Our economic sovereignty was stripped by British 18th century methods of financialization and free trade. In exchange, we imported everything: food, cheap crap, and our trade deficit exploded. In other words, more was taken out than was put back in. Donald Trump is reversing that. That's why tariffs are such a powerful weapon and are so hated by the global elites. And they're working. We're rebuilding our manufacturing base and our economic independence. In November alone, ground was broken on 136 new factories, 78 processing plants, and 199 new warehouses. But even more important than physical growth is the reawakening of a productive spirit within the population, and especially among young people. Look at this headline. Look at the response of young people in Blue, Massachusetts to the opportunity of getting vocational training and having a productive job rather than a dead-end liberal arts degree with tons of debt. And even more important than that is the promise of the future. of going beyond where we were at the end of World War II, before we surrendered to British 18th century methods. Trump's Truth Social merger with TAE Technologies, one of the world's leading fusion energy companies, signals something revolutionary. Cheap, clean, limitless fusion power will drive our economy into the future and propel mankind into the solar system. That is what will make America truly great and productive again. So, as we stand on the eve of 2026, the 250th anniversary of our independence, we have an unprecedented opportunity. Trump is dismantling the entire post-war imperial system. He's ending perpetual wars. He's rebuilding American manufacturing. He's treating nations as sovereign partners, not pieces on a chessboard. But he can't do it alone. 2025 was an incredible year, but the British establishment wants to turn back the clock. They will fight with everything they have, using their assets in Congress, the media, and the intelligence agencies. They'll create chaos and try and turn Trump supporters against each other. Well, don't fall for it. Keep your eye on the strategic picture. And that's where Promethean Action comes in. We've been fighting this fight for decades, and we understand both the enemy and the solution. Get our newsletter, support us as paying members or contributors, and most important, get active. Because if enough of you join Trump and us on this battlefield, we will celebrate our 250th birthday by finishing what our forefathers started. So let's get ready for a very fateful new year. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com.